BBC News at 6 o'clock. This is Zeb Soames. Good evening. A former youth football coach has been convicted of sexually abusing more than 20 of his trainees. Bob Higgins used the power he held over the boys' future careers to take advantage of them. The government has postponed the publication of its Brexit withdrawal bill, which had been due to go before Parliament tomorrow. It now won't be published or debated until next month. The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has led his BJP party to a resounding victory in his country's general election. More than 800 million people voted in what was the world's biggest exercise in democracy. A senior Chinese diplomat in London has warned of substantial consequences for her country's investment in the UK should Huawei be excluded from Britain's 5G data network. The children's author Judith Kerr, creator of The Tiger Who Came to Tea and the Mog series, has died. She was 95. A football coach has been found guilty of exploiting his position to indecently assault children in his care over a 25-year period. Bob Higgins, who's 66, is the latest in a string of predatory paedophiles to be convicted of targeting aspiring young footballers. He ran the youth training programmes at Southampton and Peterborough football clubs. His victims described him as a godlike father figure and mentor, and feared speaking out in case it harmed their careers. A case against Higgins in the 1990s collapsed, but dozens more people came forward after a BBC interview with other victims of abuse by football coaches. Our correspondent Duncan Kennedy was at Bournemouth Crown Court.
When the guilty verdicts were read out in court, the grown men who were once boys hugged and shed tears. Their 40-year search for justice was over. For generations, Bob Higgins was a youth team coach who nurtured the dreams of young footballers. This video from 30 years ago shows him training with a boy in a gym. It all looks innocent, but Higgins was a prolific sexual predator who abused dozens of players over 25 years. He was head of youth development at Southampton Football Club and brought on future England stars like Matt Le Tissier and Alan Shearer, although neither of these men were involved in this trial. Billy Seymour was one of Higgins' victims. He died in a car crash last January, but speaking before that, after he waived his right to anonymity, he said he believed Higgins could make him a football professional. Instead, he says Higgins abused him.
And he'd come and sit down on the bed, stroking my hair, and then he would tell me to move up, and he would lay on top of the covers, and his hands would be going under the covers and touching my groin area.
Higgins later moved to Peterborough United and other clubs. Detective Chief Inspector Dave Brown from Hampshire Police said today that Higgins' offences were systematic and manipulative.
They were young men who dreamed of being footballers, and he held that key to that goal in his hands, and he exploited that as part of his sexual offending.
This video from 1986 shows Higgins leading a football parade in Southampton. But at the back is Barry Burnell, another football coach who was jailed last year for 30 years for abusing junior players. Tonight, the Football Association said that its own inquiry into the whole football abuse scandal was continuing. Bob Higgins will be sentenced later.
The government has scrapped the publication of the Brexit withdrawal agreement bill tomorrow, after Theresa May's latest proposals were widely condemned by Conservative MPs, including ministers. Downing Street said she was listening to colleagues' concerns about the legislation, and the document would be published in the first week of June. Tomorrow, Mrs May will meet the chairman of the 1922 committee of Tory MPs to discuss her future, as she continues to face calls for her to resign. Our assistant political editor Norman Smith has been following developments at Westminster.
The decision to postpone the publication of the withdrawal bill has heightened speculation at Westminster that the Prime Minister could be poised to abandon her badly mauled Brexit deal, a move demanded not just by her many backbench critics, but even some of her supporters, fearful that the bill is doomed and heading towards a crushing defeat in the Commons. The decision by Number 10 came after allies of the Prime Minister initially responded this morning to the mounting criticism with defiance. Mrs May, it was said, was going nowhere, was determined to press ahead with her bill and would put it to a vote as planned on June the 7th. A few hours later, however, in the Commons, the junior whip, Mark Spencer, signalled a rethink.
When it comes to the Withdrawal Act Bill, we do plan to publish the Withdrawal Act Bill in the week commencing the 3rd of June. We'd hope to hold second reading on Friday the 7th of June. At the moment, we've not secured agreement to this in the usual channels. Of course, we'll update the House when we return from recess.
There's also been continuing pressure on the Prime Minister today from other Cabinet Ministers. The Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, and the Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, both met Mrs May to underline their unease over aspects of the bill. Sources close to Mr Javid afterwards said it had been a frank discussion. Meanwhile, Andrea Leadsom, who quit the Cabinet yesterday, was today asked if she thought it was now time for Mrs May to stand down.
Well, that's a matter for her, but for me, I felt I couldn't, in all conscience, stand up and deliver the business statement today with a withdrawal agreement bill in it that I couldn't support elements of. So I have no doubts that I made the right decision, and of course it's for the Prime Minister to decide what's right for her and for the country. Thanks very much.
Downing Street today confirmed Mrs May will meet the chairman of the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady, tomorrow morning for what may prove a pivotal meeting. Senior Tories have warned if Mrs May does not tell Sir Graham she's abandoning her bill and confirm a date for her departure, then they will move to trigger a no-confidence vote. Events appear to be rapidly moving to a head, with many at Westminster now convinced the next 24 hours are set to be decisive in determining the fate of Mrs May's Brexit deal and premiership.
The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has won a second 5-year term in an emphatic election victory. Mr Modi said support for him in a vote which many considered a referendum on his leadership was humbling. The contest had pitted his nationalist Hindu BJP party against a broadly secular opposition led by Rahul Gandhi's Congress party. Despite a farming crisis and with unemployment at its highest in 45 years, voters overwhelmingly backed Mr Modi's campaign with its emphasis on national security and its hardline religious agenda. From the capital, Delhi, our correspondent Rajini Vajanathan sent this report.
Outside the BJP headquarters in Delhi, supporters are rejoicing at a victory which defied the odds. It's the first time a party's won consecutive majorities in India in half a century. No wonder supporters are deliriously happy. Some are waving flags, others are dancing and holding larger-than-life cardboard cutouts of Narendra Modi, the party's leader, who's back for a second term. Addressing a rally, the Prime Minister dedicated his victory to the people of India.
People of India have given the biggest mandate in history. I salute its 1.3 billion people.
In an election that lasted 6 weeks, the boy who once sold tea presented himself as India's strongman, who could keep the country safe from outside threats. His autocratic Hindu nationalist agenda also resonated with many across the nation. But it left others in fear. In the last 5 years, religious minorities have become increasingly marginalised in this country, with the BJP blamed for stoking the fires of intolerance. The Indian political commentator Arti Jairath says Mr Modi has deepened the country's divides.
And he believes in the politics of polarisation. It's us against them, it's Hindus against the Muslims, it's, poor against the rich. Because if he identifies with a certain group, that group just comes out with blind loyalty and votes for him.
This was also a devastating defeat for the opposition Congress party, led by Rahul Gandhi, heir of the Nehru-Gandhi family, which once ruled this nation for decades. The political future of this dynasty is now uncertain, but Mr Gandhi wasn't being drawn into what went wrong.
Frankly, today it doesn't matter what I think went wrong. What matters is that the people of India have decided that Narendra Modi is going to be the Prime Minister. And as an Indian person, I fully respect that.
Mr Modi's victory has shaken the political landscape in the world's largest democracy. Like other nationalistic world leaders, he offers a vision of hope and national pride. But he's also reinvigorated a climate of fear and suspicion. The question people will be asking tonight: will Prime Minister Modi be able to steer a deeply divided country towards the bright future he's promised?
One of China's most senior diplomats in the UK has warned of substantial repercussions if the telecoms company Huawei is banned from providing equipment for Britain's superfast 5G network. Chen Wen, the Chinese chargé d'affaires in London, insisted that Beijing would never ask Huawei to help its intelligence agencies. In a separate development, the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo accused Huawei's chief executive of lying about his links to the Chinese government. Here's our technology correspondent, Rory Kethlen-Jones.
This week, the Cambridge-based chip designer Arm told staff to stop working with Huawei, and 2 UK mobile operators announced they would not be stocking the Chinese firm's 5G phones. Today, China's chargé d'affaires in London warned there would be consequences if the UK banned Huawei from the new 5G data networks, which the US government has urged it to do. Chen Wen told The World at One those consequences would be substantial.
What kind of signals do you think this kind of gesture was sent out to other investors and other Chinese companies? Is UK still open? Is still welcoming, extending a welcoming arm to other Chinese investors?
Ms. Chen insisted that the Chinese government would never seek to order Huawei to help spy on Britain. But the US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo,